Hi, today we're going to glaze our floppy petal bowl. I've got a red glaze here. You can see the tile on top of the lid in my studio always exemplifies what the color will turn out to be after it's fired in the kiln. So even though it looks very pinkish and it's a thick gel, it will fire to be a nice bright red. I'm going to use a fan brush because the fan brush spreads so evenly, and because the whole petal, every petal, is going to be this bright, bright red, I can be a little generous and not have to be so super particular and tight about where I'm glazing. Notice that I am glazing from center out. I'm not going to do a bunch of zigzags back and forth because glaze does tend to have brush stroke lines after it comes out of the kiln. You're going to see those lines. So I'd rather, if there are going to be any lines, that they go in the direction that the petal would grow. So I'm starting from the center, working my way out and smoothing the glaze in that direction continually. And every once in a while, the glaze just doesn't want to go into some of these deep lines I've created. So I go back and forth a few times, and sometimes I just kind of shimmy, shimmy, shimmy and jiggle the brush around in there, but then finish with that extended brush stroke again, so that my brush lines that are shown in the glaze after it's fired actually look like the petal has grown outward, and it looks more natural that way. The thing with glaze, it is a glass coating. It needs to be put on generously. I'm smoothing it out thin, but I'm going to let it dry and do it another layer. Let it dry and do it another layer. So there's 3 whole layers applied nice and evenly with the brush. If you're not careful and you want to speed things up and you kind of blob it on to get that thickness right away, I've done this too many times. I end up with a patchy coating and it's uneven. I'm not thrilled with it. So the best way to do it is, like the directions say, brush it on in 3 even layers, getting the glaze everywhere. And again, I'm going to shimmy, shimmy in some of these little white spots to make sure it gets in there. The edge of a dish or a bowl or sculpture is always the trickiest thing to remember to do. People tend to forget. When they're working on the inside, they're definitely working on the inside. When they're working on the outside, they're definitely working on the outside. And then when I'm putting it in the kiln, I see all these little white spots on the edges. So be careful and purposely do that edge as well. Nice and smooth. Now it's going really fast, right? But again, like I said, this is still only 1 layer. So we need to be careful, mindful, and keep track of the layers. Sometimes it's easy to get into a conversation and forget what layer you're on. I've even had people leave a piece of paper and pen right next to them and put a hash mark, 1 layer. And then they continue with conversation, and then they use another hash mark for their 2nd layer. So I'm not going to make you sit through all 3 layers, but when it's chalky and dull looking, you know that it's dry and it's ready for another layer. But while this is still kind of wet looking, it's darker, I'm going to let that dry and then move on to my next color for the center of the flower. I'm going to use a nice bright yellow. And because the center of the bowl is so textured, I'm going to do a lot of poking, and I'm going to poke very carefully because I don't want this yellow to be all over my red. Just holding my bowl really still and poking up and down super carefully. And making sure not to leave any white spots. wherever you leave it white, it's not completely sealed. You want to have your 3 layers of glaze on there so that it's food tight and dinnerware safe. There we go. So then what I'm going to do is when this is completely dry, I'll turn it over and glaze the outside, and then do the inside 2 more times and do the outside 2 more times. Again, also with the center. You need your 3 layers to make sure that it is fully glazed, dinnerware safe, and watertight. Thanks for watching.